Elias Vorn stepped off the gravity skimmer onto Krythos V, his boots crunching over the jagged obsidian shards that littered the landing platform. The air was thin and acrid, a mixture of sulfur and ozone, and each breath burned his lungs in a way that made him question why humans had ever volunteered for this assignment. Around him, the sky roared with endless storms, lightning forked across jagged mountains, and the crystalline structures scattered across the plains pulsed faintly with energy. Everything about the planet screamed danger, a warning he could neither ignore nor escape. He pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, though it did little to shield him from the biting wind. Beside him, other cadets, some human, some barely recognizable under layers of exoskeletal armor from other species, were adjusting to the atmosphere, muttering about the brutal training awaiting them. Elias swallowed his apprehension. They had all heard the stories, the tales of warriors who entered the arena of reflexes and never returned. And yet, here they were, willing or not, to test themselves against legends. The platform vibrated beneath his feet as a suborbital transport descended, disgorging a group of Jacquerie observers. They moved with a fluid precision that made Elias' stomach knot. Their exoskeletons shimmered like dark metal in the stormlight, neural spikes twitching as their multiple eyes scanned the incoming cadets. Elias felt a prickling along his spine, a cold warning from instinct that humans weren't meant to face these beings unprepared. "Cadet Vorn," a voice called. It was deep, measured, and carried the weight of command. Talric, his instructor, approached, his human form surprisingly sturdy against the storm. His eyes were hard, but not without calculation. "You're late. The arena doesn't wait for hesitation. It doesn't wait for doubt. You will survive only if you move before the danger reaches you." Elias nodded, trying to steady his pulse. Talric's words weren't new, but hearing them here, amid the tangible threat of Krythos V, made them concrete in a way the training decks on Earth never could. "I understand, sir," he replied, keeping his voice steady even though adrenaline burned his veins. Talric's gaze lingered on him, assessing. "Understand isn't enough here. You must anticipate. Reflex alone won't save you, you must become the motion and the decision at once. Remember, the Jacquerie don't just strike, they perceive weakness, hesitation. That is what kills." Elias swallowed again, trying to reconcile the fear that clawed at his stomach with the faint thrill that tickled his mind. He had trained for this, yes, but he had trained on simulators, on holographic projections, on exercises where the consequences were hypothetical. Here, consequences were absolute. One misstep, one hesitation, and it wouldn't be a lesson, it would be his end. Talric clapped him on the shoulder, hard enough to leave a sting. "Come. See what you're really up against." He led Elias down a narrow corridor that opened into the vast expanse of the arena. The space was enormous, an irregular labyrinth of black rock, jagged spires, and towering crystalline pillars that reflected stormlight like fractured mirrors. Cadets and trainees moved through it with controlled chaos, some sparring, some running through agility drills, and others already matched with alien warriors, their fights flashing in brief, deadly bursts. Elias watched a Jacquerie strike a humanoid opponent. The speed was unlike anything he had ever seen. Limbs blurred, movements anticipated and countered with surgical precision. The human cadet opposite the alien barely had time to react before he was thrown across the arena, collapsing into shards of rock. Elias' stomach turned, but he forced himself to focus. This wasn't fear, it was observation. Survival here required understanding the enemy as much as outpacing them. A voice echoed in the arena, crisp and sharp, "Next pair, Vorn." Elias' pulse jumped. He looked up to see a Jacquerie stepping forward, taller and broader than the story suggested, its neural spikes shimmering faintly, eyes locking onto him with a predator's focus. His first encounter. The moment he had trained for, yet dreaded beyond measure. He stepped forward, boots crunching over shattered obsidian, forcing his mind into a state of hyper-awareness. Every muscle tensed, every nerve screamed with anticipation. Talric's voice cut through the storm in his mind. "Anticipate. Move before the danger reaches you. The Jacquerie didn't speak. Communication wasn't necessary. Its presence alone radiated lethal intent. Elias felt the weight of the legend pressing down on him, the stories of cadets shredded in seconds, the arrogance of humans crushed under alien precision. And yet, beneath the fear, a spark ignited. Something instinctive, raw, and untested, a reflexive edge that no simulator could have prepared him for. He clenched his fists. The storm around him seemed to fade into silence, the chaos of the arena reducing to the immediate threat before him. Time stretched, each heartbeat marking a precise measure of distance and opportunity. The alien stepped forward, limbs coiling with potential energy, neural spikes twitching in rhythm with its perception. Elias mirrored the motion, his body unaware of whether it was instinct or training guiding him, but every fiber of his being aligned with survival. For the first time, he realized that fear could be an ally, that the human resilience whispered about in legends might be more than myth. It was in his blood, in the reflexive adaptation honed through generations of uncertainty and survival. And now, in this crucible of jagged rock and deadly intent, it would be tested. The storm above roared as if acknowledging the impending clash, and Elias took the first step forward, meeting the gaze of the predator with something more than defiance. He met it with the quiet certainty of a human who had never been fully understood, and who might just be underestimated one time too many. Every second counted. Every motion was a decision. And the arena had only just begun. The Jacquerie before him shifted, every movement precise, deliberate, like a predator sizing up prey it already knew it would kill. Elias' pulse hammered in his ears, each beat marking the distance between them, each breath a countdown to violence. The arena stretched around them, jagged pillars and crystalline obelisks fracturing the stormlight into dizzying patterns that made depth perception a challenge. Yet the human cadet forced his mind to sharpen, to strip away everything unnecessary until all that remained was motion, reaction, and survival. The first strike came before he had fully measured the distance. The alien lunged with a speed that seemed impossible, a blur of limbs and neural spikes vibrating with lethal intent. Elias reacted instinctively, rolling to the side as a limb slammed into the ground where his head had been seconds ago. He hit the jagged floor, pain exploding across his shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the awareness that the attack had been close enough to kill him. He scrambled upright, the reflexes he didn't know he possessed guiding him. The human mind was slow in calculation but fast in adaptation. Every new strike from the Jacquerie forced him to adjust his stance, his timing, his perception of momentum. The alien's eyes tracked him, calculating, learning, adapting. Elias realized that the creature expected him to panic, to commit a fatal error. But he didn't panic. He observed. He measured. He moved. Nyx, as the overseers had named her, extended a clawed hand, aiming for his chest. Elias ducked, pivoted, and grabbed her wrist before she could retract. Shock rippled through him as contact was made. Her grip was like iron, her strength overwhelming, but there was more, a pulse, a faint neural vibration that transmitted intent. He could feel the direction, the pressure, the subtle micro-movements that signaled her next strike. He wasn't supposed to feel it. Humans weren't supposed to sense Jacquerie reflexes directly. He twisted, using leverage rather than strength, and felt her momentum arc past him. She didn't strike again immediately, instead, she adjusted, recalibrated. Elias could see it in the shift of her stance, the flare of her neural spikes, the narrowing of her alien eyes. The arena seemed to hold its breath. Cadets paused mid-drill, instructors leaned forward, and even the stormlight fractured into tense, irregular patterns as if acknowledging the anomaly in progress. Elias' body moved before his mind could fully process. He had been trained to anticipate, to dodge, to counter in simulations, but this was real. Each strike from Nyx was faster, more lethal than anything the hollow constructs had thrown at him. And yet, somehow, he met them. Not with raw power, not with premeditated strategy, but with instinct. He discovered, in the crucible of attack, that his reactions could outpace anticipation. Humans, slow and fragile on paper, had evolved a kernel of reflexive adaptation that activated under extreme threat. Nick struck again, a spinning swipe aimed at his head. Elias sidestepped, parried with his forearm, and felt the vibration of her neural pulse through his grip. He twisted again, letting her momentum carry her past, and for the first time, the alien's expression shifted, not anger, not calculation, but curiosity. She had never encountered an opponent who could move in rhythm with her own lethal impulses. The fight continued, rapid, chaotic, almost a dance of death. Each second stretched as Elias' reflexes absorbed the incoming strikes and redirected energy he didn't know he could harness. He wasn't thinking in terms of offense or defense, there was no plan, only motion, reaction, survival. The arena around them blurred, the jagged rock and crystalline spires becoming irrelevant as the human and the Jacquerie moved in a deadly synchronicity that defied expectation. Other cadets watched from the sidelines, disbelief etched on their faces. Jacquerie observers twitched, neural spikes pulsing in silent communication, analyzing the anomaly. Talric's eyes narrowed as he observed Elias. This wasn't just survival. This was adaptation in action, something the human species had been rumored to possess but had never demonstrated in such lethal clarity. The pace accelerated. Nick struck from above, attempting to crush Elias beneath a downward swing, but his grip and instinct combined to twist her off balance. A single misstep from her could be fatal, and Elias' body was ready to exploit it. Pain flared as she retaliated, a swipe grazing his side, but he barely registered it. There was no room for distraction, no time for fear. Only the motion, the rhythm, the fight. Seconds became a chain of reactions, each faster than the last. Elias felt the thrill of survival mix with a growing understanding of his own latent potential. The alien warrior, the perfect predator, was adjusting, but so was he. Each contact, each brush of claws against armor, each shift of stance, taught him something new. He was learning not by thought but by reflex, an instinctive mastery that no training deck could replicate. The storm above cracked with lightning, illuminating the arena as if highlighting the confrontation. Nyx lunged again, and Elias anticipated the strike before it fully materialized. His body coiled, moved, and struck back in a single, fluid motion. The force of it, the precision, the timing, was not just counterattack, it was exploitation of the alien's expectation. Nyx faltered, a fraction of a second too slow. The legendary predator hesitated. Elias' pulse raced, every fiber alive with the realization that he had reached a moment no human had ever achieved. The balance between instinct and action, between survival and dominance. The fight was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. The arena seemed to lean in, the storm's roar synchronizing with the cadence of their deadly exchange. And in that instant, Elias knew that Krythos V, the jagged planet, the lethal arena, the predator he faced, were no longer the limits of his fear. He was something unexpected, something the galaxy had never truly accounted for. And whatever came next, he would face it with the full force of human resilience unleashed. Elias felt the momentum shift even before he realized it. The tension in Nyx's body was almost imperceptible at first, a slight flare of neural spikes, a subtle twitch in her limbs, but his reflexes caught it. He pivoted, letting her momentum carry her past him again, this time using the moment to force her into the jagged edge of a crystalline pillar. The alien's exoskeleton scraped against the sharp rock, a faint grinding sound that would have been terrifying to any ordinary cadet, but Elias barely registered it. He was alive, and the rhythm of the fight had begun to synchronize with the instinct buried deep in his human frame. Nyx recoiled, recalibrating, and for the first time, Elias saw hesitation in her movements. It was minimal, a flicker of uncertainty, but enough for him to exploit. His muscles moved on their own accord, reacting to signals his conscious mind barely registered. The cadet had been trained to survive, to anticipate danger, but what he was doing now went beyond training. This was adaptation in real time, an instinctive intelligence that allowed him to match, and even counter, the predator's lethal precision. The arena seemed to pulse around them. The storm above shattered the horizon in jagged flashes of lightning, illuminating the chaotic battleground. Shadows stretched and twisted with each strike, reflecting the deadly dance between human and Jacquerie. Observers fell silent, cadets frozen mid-drill, and Tauric's eyes narrowed as he watched. Elias was demonstrating something no simulator could teach, something the galaxy had long dismissed as myth: human reflexive adaptation under lethal stress. Nyx lunged again, claws aimed at his chest, but Elias didn't dodge. He met the strike head-on, gripping her forearm and feeling the pulse of intent running through her neural spikes. The alien adjusted instantly, trying to twist him off, but Elias let the motion continue, using it to redirect her balance against another pillar. A jarring impact shook the crystal and sent shards scattering, yet Elias held firm. Every movement he made was a conversation with the alien, force against force, intent against instinct, and slowly, imperceptibly, he was winning. He ducked under a swipe, rolled, and launched into a series of counterstrikes he hadn't consciously planned. Each punch and kick, each twist of his body, was guided by instinct alone, a reflexive computation that no algorithm could predict. Nyx's strikes became less fluid, more cautious, as if she were surprised by the human's ability to anticipate and exploit her own lethal motions. Elias realized that the Predator's greatest weapon, perfect reflexes, was no longer infallible. The cadets on the sidelines murmured, disbelief rippling through their ranks. None of them had seen a human maintain such control in the face of a Jacquerie. Many had believed survival was impossible, yet here was Elias, alive, countering a creature that had been bred and trained for centuries for a single purpose: elimination. The human's body was moving faster than thought, faster than expectation, and the Predator was forced to adapt mid-strike, a dangerous and rarely seen error in combat theory. Nyx's strikes became sharper, faster, more desperate. She lunged with an overhead sweep, claws aimed to crush, neural spikes flaring in violent rhythm. Elias twisted mid-motion, sensing the direction of the attack through touch, momentum, and the subtle vibrations of her intent. He grabbed her wrist again, but this time didn't release. Instead, he used the contact to pull her off balance, redirecting her forward into an arching flip over a pillar. The alien's body hit the ground hard, a metallic sound echoing through the arena, but she recovered instantly, landing with Predator-like grace. Elias' chest burned with exertion, every muscle screaming, every nerve alight with adrenaline. Yet he felt no fear, only an acute awareness of every second, every micro-movement. He realized that this was what survival demanded: complete immersion, surrendering to instinct while maintaining conscious control. Nyx, the Predator who had eliminated countless cadets before him, hesitated fractionally, giving Elias a sliver of opportunity he could not afford to waste. The fight escalated. Nyx struck from above with a spinning kick, her claws grazing his armor and leaving a shallow scratch, yet Elias pivoted and countered, using the contact to push her backward. He felt the vibrations of her intent through their grip again, a pulse of speed and direction, and exploited it, letting her momentum carry her off balance into a jagged corner of the arena. This was no longer a training exercise, it was a test of the limits of human potential against a lethal predator. For the first time, Nyx vocalized a sound, a low hiss, frustration edging through the controlled predator tone. Elias noted it almost absent-mindedly. The alien was adapting, yes, but too slowly. Humans, it seemed, were unpredictable in ways the Jacquerie had not accounted for. Every instinctive counter, every unplanned maneuver from Elias introduced variability into the fight, a chaos that even the most perfect reflexes could not fully anticipate. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the precise movements of the duel. Elias felt the rhythm of the fight in his bones. Each strike he dodged, each motion he countered, reinforced the realization that he was not merely surviving. He was contending, challenging, and perhaps for the first time, dominating. Nyx lunged again, faster, more calculated, but Elias was ready. He shifted weight, grabbed her arm, and for a fleeting moment, they were locked in perfect opposition, predator against predator, human against alien, instinct against instinct. A bead of sweat burned his eye as the motion carried them forward. The arena was silent now except for the clash of bodies and the storm overhead. Talric leaned forward, a rare expression of awe crossing his face. The cadets watched, holding their breath. The Jacquerie observers twitched, neural spikes signaling some internal calculation. Nyx had met her equal, and the realization was beginning to dawn on them. Elias felt it too, a sudden clarity, a fleeting window where the predator was vulnerable, where the human adaptation could assert control. He didn't hesitate. Motion and intention merged. Every strike, every dodge, every counter had led to this single convergence of reflex, timing, and raw instinct. The predator had underestimated him once. The human had adapted. And in the silence of anticipation, Elias knew the next moments would decide everything. Nyx's eyes narrowed, the flare of her neural spikes pulsing in rapid, erratic beats. The hesitation was gone, replaced by the lethal precision that had earned her centuries of victories. Elias felt the shift immediately. Every muscle, every instinct, screamed that this was no longer a rehearsal, no longer a test, this was a battle that demanded everything he had. He adjusted his stance, feet gripping the jagged floor, aware of every edge and crystal around him, every inch of distance that could be exploited or defended. The alien moved first, a blur of claws and limbs aimed to overwhelm. Elias dodged instinctively, the impact of a near miss sending vibrations up his arm as he grasped her forearm mid-swing. The pulse of intent flowed into him, a signal of speed, force, and trajectory, and he used it to twist her motion against her own momentum. Nyx stumbled, and for a brief heartbeat, he glimpsed an opening. He didn't hesitate. With a twist and a surge, he launched forward, leveraging his grip to redirect her downward. Nyx hit the jagged crystal at an angle, scraping against the sharp surface, but she recovered instantly, flipping backward and landing with predatory grace. Elias' arms burned from the exertion, every fiber of his body screaming, but the adrenaline coursing through him sharpened rather than dulled his perception. He had moved beyond training, he was reacting to motion itself, anticipating intention in a way that felt preternatural. Nyx lunged again, faster, more aggressive, the claws slicing through the air toward him. Elias pivoted, let her momentum sweep past him, and grabbed her wrist again, feeling the pulse of her neural spikes. The energy, the intent, was raw and violent, yet he sensed the rhythm now, a pattern hidden in the chaos. Every strike, every motion, fed him information. Humans were slow on paper, fragile and predictable, but he was discovering the countermeasure the galaxy had underestimated for centuries, adaptation under lethal stress. He forced her into another pillar, a sharp jagged edge that would have shattered weaker bones, yet Nyx twisted mid-fall, claws scraping across rock, regaining balance. Her gaze locked onto his, and Elias realized she was learning as well, adapting to his unpredictable rhythm. This was no longer a one-sided trial, it was a clash of instincts, predator against predator, the hunter and the hunted indistinguishable in motion. Elias' chest heaved as he ducked under a high sweep, rolled, and sprang up, striking with a calculated hit he had not consciously planned. His body moved with precision born of instinct, redirecting Nyx's wrist and using her own speed against her. The alien's foot hit the ground at an awkward angle, a fraction of a second too slow, and Elias exploited it, stepping into the strike and driving with his shoulder, sending her staggering into the crystalline spire. Pain shot through his side as she countered with a swipe, but it only reinforced the rhythm he was learning. Each strike was a lesson, each contact a conversation of forces. Nyx's speed was unmatched, but her reliance on precise calculation was her weakness against something unpredictable. The human mind, Elias realized, was chaotic in ways the Jacquerie had never measured. The storm outside intensified, lightning tearing across the sky, illuminating their movements in violent flashes. Shadows stretched and fractured, reflecting the duel in jagged, distorted patterns. Every cadet in the observation stands froze, some whispering, some gripping rails, unable to look away from the improbable scene unfolding before them. Talric's eyes were fixed on Elias, unblinking, calculating, the pride and disbelief barely masked behind his stern expression. This was human resilience incarnate, raw and unfiltered. Nyx's attacks became more calculated, her movements fluid yet tense, a predator adjusting to the anomaly it had encountered. She spun, twisted, lunged, trying to find a rhythm, an opening that Elias would misstep into, but he didn't. Every dodge, every counter, was sharper, faster, more deliberate. His body reacted before thought could process, an instinctive mastery emerging from the chaos. A low hiss escaped Nyx's mandibles, a sound Elias barely registered through the storm's roar. The alien had never faced such an opponent. Humans were typically hesitant, predictable, and fragile. They were easily broken under speed, under pressure. Yet here was one, alive and contending, moving with a precision that defied expectation. Every contact taught Elias something new, every dodge refined his reflexes further. Elias felt the surge of confidence, calculated, measured. Not arrogance, not overestimation, but clarity. Nyx's own perfection was predictable in subtle ways, the patterns of her strikes betraying small hints of intent. He moved with her rhythm now, not against it, anticipating, exploiting, becoming a mirror to the lethal motions she had mastered for centuries. The arena seemed to respond. Crystalline pillars reflected the streaks of motion, jagged spires fractured the lightning into chaotic patterns, and the cadets and observers alike felt the tension that had built to a peak. Taurik's hands were clenched at his sides, eyes narrowing. Elias was not just surviving, he was dictating the flow of the duel, bending the predator's own instincts to his advantage. Nyx lunged high, claws arcing to crush, and Elias twisted mid-strike, feeling the pulse of her motion in his grip. He let her momentum carry her forward, redirecting her through a precise combination of leverage and instinct. She slammed into a jagged corner of rock, staggering, and for the first time, Elias realized he had reached the threshold. One more coordinated move, and the balance of power would shift irreversibly. Every nerve screamed, every muscle demanded action. The storm above tore with thunder, the arena silent but for the clash of predator and counter-predator. Elias' eyes met Nyx's, and in that instant, both recognized the anomaly. The human was no longer merely a cadet. He was an active force, a lethal variable, and the predator had underestimated him. Elias inhaled sharply, sensing the opening, feeling the precise moment where instinct, momentum, and intent converged. The next motion would decide everything, and he was ready. Elias' grip tightened on Nyx's wrist, the pulse of her neural spikes thrumming violently against his own nerve endings. Every fiber of his body was coiled, attuned to the predator's motion, and yet he sensed a shift, a subtle hesitation that signaled opportunity. The Jacquerie lunged again, faster than before, claws aimed with lethal precision, but Elias met her movement with a combination of instinct and adaptation. He didn't block or dodge, he flowed with her strike, guiding her momentum against the jagged crystalline pillar behind her. The impact reverberated through the rock, shards scattering in every direction. Nyx's exoskeleton scraped against the sharp edges, and the sound was almost deafening. For a heartbeat, the predator seemed disoriented, recalibrating mid-motion. Elias felt it, the infinitesimal imbalance that had opened up for only a fraction of a second. He twisted, letting her momentum sweep past him, then pivoted, driving forward with a force that he had never consciously calculated. His body moved as one unit, instinct and intention inseparable, every strike flowing into the next without thought. Nyx struck again, claws slicing the air where his head had been milliseconds ago. Elias ducked, rolled, and grabbed her wrist once more, this time holding firm. The pulse of her intent flowed into him, faster, sharper, more desperate. He could feel the calculated effort to anticipate his movements, to adjust mid-strike, but human reflexes, raw, adaptive, untrained, responded with a speed the Jacquerie could not fully predict. He leveraged her momentum, twisting her arm, forcing her to stumble against another crystalline spire. The spire groaned under the impact, but Nyx landed gracefully, her balance only momentarily disrupted. The arena was silent now except for the storm raging above and the clash of bodies. Cadets froze mid-drill, and instructors leaned forward, gripping rails as if to anchor themselves to witness the impossible. Taurik's gaze was sharp, calculating, a mix of pride and disbelief etched across his face. Elias had not just survived, he was dictating the pace of the fight, bending a predator's instincts to his advantage. Nyx adjusted instantly, claws spinning, neural spikes flickering in rapid bursts. She lunged with a spinning sweep aimed to crush, but Elias anticipated, pivoting with the rhythm of her motion. He grabbed her wrist, feeling the surge of lethal intent and redirecting it downward. The alien slammed into the jagged floor with a metallic impact, recovering in mid-roll, claws scraping rock, eyes narrowing as she calculated again. She was learning, yes, but Elias was evolving faster. A low hiss escaped Nyx, frustration bleeding into the otherwise perfect predator poise. Elias recognized it as recognition, an acknowledgement that the human was no ordinary opponent. The anomaly he represented was undeniable. His body moved instinctively, a network of nerves and reflexes calculating trajectories faster than thought. Every contact was a lesson, every dodge a refinement, and he was exploiting the tiny weaknesses in Nyx's pattern. The storm above split the sky with blinding lightning, illuminating their movements in stark, fractured shadows. The cadets and observers alike watched, some whispering, some holding their breath, unable to look away. Each strike, each counter, each brush of claws and flesh or armor created a rhythm that Elias could feel, a dance of death where he had begun to dictate the steps. Nyx spun again, claws slicing through the air, and Elias twisted mid-strike, guiding her momentum into a fall over a jagged crystal formation. Pain shot through his shoulder as she tried to counter, but he let her force flow through him, redirecting it with minimal exertion. He realized that this was more than survival, it was control. The predator was adapting, yes, but his adaptation outpaced hers. He could feel it, the fractional advantage he had carved through instinct and the untested resilience of human reflexes. The cadence of the fight accelerated. Nyx lunged high, claws aimed to crush his head, and Elias moved almost before the attack had fully formed. He twisted, pivoted, and struck at the precise angle that exploited her momentum. Nyx faltered, a split-second hesitation, and Elias seized it. Every strike, every dodge, every movement had led to this critical convergence, and he could feel the opening widening. Lightning tore across the sky again, and for a moment the arena froze in jagged light, the shadows of combat reflecting off crystalline pillars like fractured mirrors. The predator's confidence wavered, the human's rhythm had become unpredictable, uncatchable, and impossibly fast. Elias sensed the final opportunity forming. He didn't hesitate, didn't overthink. Motion and instinct merged, timing and force aligned, and his body became the execution of all the reflexes he had never consciously trained. Nyx lunged one final time, claws slicing the air in a deadly arc. Elias twisted, caught her wrist, redirected her momentum, and the moment crystallized. The predator, perfect and lethal for centuries, could not recover from the flaw in her pattern. The opening was infinitesimal but absolute. The culmination of every dodge, every counter, every instinctive adjustment led here. The human was ready. Elias exhaled sharply, muscles coiled, nerve endings alive with energy. The arena's storm seemed to pause in recognition, the lightning casting long, fractured shadows across the jagged battlefield. He felt the surge of reflex, the untested power of human adaptability, and for the first time, he knew he could end this. The predator had underestimated him, and he would exploit it. Elias felt the pulse of Nyx's movements in his own nerve endings, the lethal rhythm of her strikes now entirely visible to him in instinct and force. The arena seemed to contract around them, crystalline spires towering, shadows fractured under the jagged lightning, the storm screaming its fury above as if acknowledging the confrontation. Nyx lunged, claws slicing in a precise arc, but Elias twisted, pivoted, and intercepted her momentum. He could feel the micro-shifts in her weight, the slight overextension in her swing, the imperceptible delay in her neural pulse. He acted before thought, coiling his body like a spring. Every strike she made was met with a counter not planned, not calculated, but instinctively executed. The alien's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, a fraction of recognition. Humans were supposed to hesitate, supposed to falter, but here he was, alive, adaptive, and moving in a rhythm she could not predict. Elias felt his adrenaline surge, not as panic, but as heightened perception. The cadence of lethal strikes and evasions became a single flowing motion, predator against predator, instinct against instinct. Nyx lashed out with a spinning kick, claws aimed to crush him mid-roll, but Elias caught the motion, redirecting her force downward. Her exoskeleton collided with jagged crystal, scraping and clanging in a metallic echo that reverberated through the arena. Pain shot through his shoulder from the previous impact, but he ignored it, every sense focused on the opening he knew must exist. The human body was fragile on paper, but fragile did not mean incapable. He had discovered a threshold of adaptation that no simulation could replicate, a lethal edge that turned instinct into weaponry. The alien predator hesitated, the faintest stutter in her strike pattern betraying centuries of perfect combat training. Elias saw it, felt it in the tension of his own muscles, the alignment of his balance. He twisted, grabbed her wrist, and forced her forward, letting momentum carry her against a spire. She bounced off, claws scraping rock, but for the first time in centuries, she had miscalculated. Elias pressed the advantage, flowing with her motion rather than resisting it. Each dodge and counter had been a lesson, and now he could read her rhythm with clarity. The storm above split the sky again, lightning flashing, illuminating their duel in stark, fractured shadows. The arena seemed to shrink, focusing attention solely on the human cadet and the alien predator. Cadets and instructors alike froze, understanding instinctively that something extraordinary was unfolding. Nyx lunged high, claws aimed for a crushing overhead strike. Elias twisted mid-motion, letting her force carry her past him, and in a seamless, instinctive movement, he shifted, coiling his body for the final maneuver. The predator's pattern was revealed in the slight angle of her limbs, the flicker of her neural spikes, the weight of her balance leaning just a fraction too far forward. Elias acted without hesitation. He grabbed her wrist firmly, feeling the pulse of lethal intent running through her. With a sudden twist and downward drive, he redirected her momentum completely, sending her off balance. The motion was a precise exploitation of all the tiny flaws he had observed, each micro-movement feeding into the next. Nyx tried to recover, claws lashing wildly, neural spikes flaring in desperate rhythm, but it was too late. The opening was absolute. Elias' body moved as one unit, instinct and intention merged into a single lethal strike. He brought the motion through with perfect timing, the momentum, leverage, and force converging. Nyx's head met the impact before she could react, and a metallic, bone-crunching sound echoed through the arena. The predator faltered, staggering as the final blow landed, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Silence followed, broken only by the storm overhead. The jagged light from the lightning fractured the arena, reflecting off crystals in distorted patterns, illuminating the impossibility of the moment. Cadets gaped, some too stunned to move. Talric's eyes widened, his hands clenching, realizing the full significance of what he had witnessed. A human cadet, underestimated, fragile by design, had outmatched a centuries-honed predator in seconds. Elias' chest heaved, muscles trembling, every nerve alive with the aftershock of exertion. He released the grip, stepping back, watching Nyx falter, her perfect combat poise shattered. The predator, trained and lethal beyond imagination, now lay defeated, an embodiment of human potential that the galaxy had long ignored. Elias had survived, yes, but more than that, he had dominated. Nyx's eyes, for the first time, showed recognition without aggression. The predator understood the anomaly, the impossible force of reflex and adaptation that had bested her. Elias breathed heavily, sweat and blood mingling, but a quiet clarity settled in him. He was alive, victorious, and a new measure of human resilience had been revealed. The arena was still, the storm raging above, the shards of crystal reflecting the aftermath. Observers murmured, whispers of disbelief rippling through the ranks. Talric exhaled sharply, pride and awe mixing in his stern expression. The human had done the unthinkable. Elias stood amidst the jagged rocks and shattered spires, breathing, feeling every ache, every nerve alive. The duel was over, and in those 3 minutes, centuries of Jacquerie confidence had been broken, replaced by the recognition that humans were not as fragile, as predictable, or as weak as the galaxy had always assumed. For a fleeting moment, Elias felt something more than triumph. He felt the weight of possibility, the knowledge that survival, adaptation, and instinct could transform the underestimated into the unstoppable. The storm above Krythos V still raged, but within the arena, the chaos had stilled. Nyx lay sprawled on the jagged ground, her claws scraping against rock, neural spikes twitching in erratic pulses. She rose slowly, each movement deliberate yet subdued, an alien predator forced into the rare position of submission. Elias stood a few meters away, chest heaving, muscles trembling, but unbroken. The rhythm of his reflexes had carried him through the impossible, and now the silence after the clash pressed heavily around him. Cadets and observers alike remained frozen, the magnitude of the moment settling over them like a heavy fog. Murmurs rippled through the stands, disbelief, awe, confusion, but no one dared break the tension. The human cadet had done what none thought possible, bested a Jacquerie warrior in full combat, exploiting instinct, adaptation, and untrained resilience to turn a lethal confrontation into victory. Tauric's face was a mixture of pride and disbelief. He stepped forward, boots crunching over shattered crystal, his eyes never leaving Elias. "You survived," Tauric said, voice low but edged with awe. "And not just survived. You dominated." Elias shook his head slightly, breath uneven, trying to calm the adrenaline still coursing through him. Survival had been the goal, yes, but the victory was more than instinct, it was revelation. He had tapped into something no training manual or simulation could ever teach. Nyx moved closer, each step precise, measured. Elias felt the shift in her presence, the aura of lethal intent softened by recognition. She spoke then, in a language of clicks and pulses, harsh and alien, but the meaning was unmistakable. Respect. A predator acknowledging a worthy opponent, something she rarely, if ever, conferred. Elias inclined his head slightly, returning the acknowledgement. They were enemies, yes, but this was no longer a contest of superiority, it was an understanding of potential. The cadets began to stir, whispers growing into audible conversations. "Did you see that?" one muttered, eyes wide. He actually did it." Another shook his head. "Impossible. The Jacquerie never lose to humans. Never." Yet Elias barely noticed. His mind was focused on the aftermath, the unspoken truth that had been revealed: humans were not as fragile as the galaxy believed. They could adapt, react, survive, and even dominate when circumstances demanded. Nyx's neural spikes pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost contemplative. She moved around him, testing his posture, his reflexes, as though cataloging the anomaly he represented. Elias adjusted slightly, instinctively, feeling the subtle tension in her movements. This was not aggression, it was calculation, respect. The predator was reassessing the rules of engagement, recalibrating her perception of the human species based on a single encounter. Tauric cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Cadets," he called, voice carrying across the arena, "observe carefully. What you just witnessed is not an exception, it is proof. Adaptation, instinct, and human resilience are real, and they can overturn centuries of expectation. Learn from this. Study it. Remember it." The cadets nodded, some still staring in shock, others scribbling notes in whatever recording devices they carried. The lesson was clear: underestimating humans was now a fatal mistake. Elias sank to one knee, inhaling deeply, letting the adrenaline ebb from his system. Pain throbbed along his side, shoulder, and legs, but it was secondary to the triumph and revelation. He had survived, yes, but more importantly, he had proven something fundamental: survival and victory did not depend solely on training, augmentations, or predatory perfection. There was power in the unpredictable, in the raw adaptability of species underestimated by the galaxy. Nyx straightened fully, claws flexing, neural spikes calming into a steady rhythm. She inclined her head toward him, a gesture of recognition that transcended language. Elias nodded in return, understanding the weight of the acknowledgement. This duel had not just tested skill, it had rewritten assumptions, shattered expectations, and illuminated the hidden potential of human reflexes. The arena overseer Clyra emerged then, her multiple eyes reflecting the lightning outside, silent but scrutinizing. She had recorded every movement, every microsecond of the fight, and her expression, impossible to read fully, suggested calculation, re-evaluation. The data from this encounter would ripple across Krythos V and beyond, challenging centuries of prejudice against human warriors. Elias rose to his full height, exhaustion mingling with adrenaline. He glanced around the arena, taking in the jagged spires, fractured crystals, and the scattered debris of combat. The storm above still roared, but within the arena, a new understanding had settled. Humans were no longer simply prey or underdogs. They were variables, wild and unpredictable forces capable of turning even the most lethal environment to their advantage. He met Taurik's gaze, and for the first time, a faint smile crossed the instructor's face. "Well done, Cadet," he said. "You've shown them what we've always known, what they've always underestimated." Elias nodded, still breathing heavily, feeling the weight of what had transpired. This victory was not just personal, it was a revelation, a shift in perception that would echo across training grounds and battlefields alike. Nyx moved to the side, recovering her stance, but Elias sensed no threat, only the quiet acknowledgement of a predator forced to recognize a new power. The cadets began moving again, whispers turning into discussion, excitement and astonishment spreading. The arena had witnessed the impossible, and the implications would linger long after the storm subsided. Elias exhaled, muscles trembling, eyes scanning the jagged terrain. He had survived the impossible, bested a centuries-honed predator, and revealed the hidden strength of human adaptability. The duel was over, but its echoes would reverberate across Krythos V and the galaxy. For the first time, humans were seen not as weak, not as fragile, but as unpredictable, resilient, and capable of turning the tide in even the deadliest of confrontations. The arena was alive with murmurs, whispers cascading into discussions, the cadets unable to contain their astonishment. Elias walked carefully across the jagged floor, still feeling the throb of exertion and pain from the duel, but buoyed by the realization that he had changed the perception of humans forever within these walls. Cadets who had trained for months alongside him now looked at him differently, their disbelief tempered by awe. Where once they had seen a fragile human, they now saw a force that could survive, and dominate, the deadliest of predators. Taurik moved alongside him, voice low but steady. "Cadet Vorn, what you've done today will be studied for years. Not just here, but across the academies. You've proven that instinct and adaptation, traits often underestimated, can surpass even centuries of honed combat skill." Elias nodded, still catching his breath. Words felt inadequate. This was more than training, more than victory, it was revelation. Nyx stood nearby, her posture rigid but no longer aggressive. The Jacquerie warriors' neural spikes had begun to pulse at a calmer rhythm, though their flicker still suggested calculation. She observed him with a predator's gaze, evaluating the human who had bested her. Elias met that gaze, unflinching, sensing respect where there had once only been lethal intent. Their duel had ended, but its ramifications were only beginning to unfold. Across the arena, cadets who had witnessed the fight began testing their own limits, inspired by the improbable victory. Moves previously considered impossible were now examined with renewed vigor. The ripple effect of Elias' performance was immediate. Humans, once underestimated, were now recognized as unpredictable forces capable of overturning assumptions. Discussions erupted among cadets about technique, reflex, and the hidden potential within their own species. The Jacquerie observers were equally affected. They conferred in low clicks and pulses, analyzing every detail of the fight, every microsecond of motion. Nyx's own recalibration was part of a broader reassessment. The centuries of tradition and belief in predator dominance were being challenged by one human cadet. This anomaly could not be ignored. Elias had forced them to recognize the raw adaptability humans possessed, a trait they had historically discounted, dismissed, and underestimated. Elias felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Talric, expression unreadable for a moment before softening into a rare smile. "You've set a precedent," he said. "Others will rise to challenge you, yes, but they will do so knowing that humans are not as fragile as we once appeared. That knowledge alone changes the dynamic here, across this planet, and beyond." Elias absorbed the weight of the words. This was more than a personal triumph. It was a turning point. Nyx stepped forward, claws flexing, then stopped just short of contact. She inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended species. Elias inclined his own head in response. The Predator's recognition was more than courtesy, it was an understanding that the rules of engagement, the assumptions of superiority, had been rewritten in 3 minutes of combat. The Jacquerie had met an unexpected force, one they could not fully predict or dominate. The cadets began to circulate around the arena, discussing what they had witnessed in hushed tones. Some replayed the moves in their minds, attempting to understand how a single human could manipulate instinct and momentum so effectively. Others watched Nyx and the other Jacquerie warriors, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the recalibration of aggression now that a precedent had been set. The impact was both immediate and profound, human potential had been revealed, and it demanded recognition. Elias exhaled, still feeling the ache of exertion, but his mind was alert, aware that the duel had set something in motion beyond the arena itself. Word would spread. Data from the fight would circulate among academies and battle simulations. Analysts, historians, and strategists would debate what had occurred here, questioning long-held assumptions about human weakness and Jacquerie supremacy. A single victory had initiated a ripple that would extend far beyond Krythos V. Talric guided him toward the observation stands, where the cadets' murmurs had grown into discussions about the human's capability. "Prepare yourself," Talric said. "You've made history, but the galaxy will test what you've proven. Every opponent, every predator, every training exercise from here on will be different because of today. You've shifted the perception of humanity in the crucible of lethal combat. That is a responsibility." Elias nodded, feeling the weight but also the thrill of it. He had survived impossible odds and emerged as an unexpected force, a living testament to human resilience. Nyx, fully recovered, moved to the perimeter of the arena, observing the interactions between cadets, instructors, and the human who had bested her. The Predator's recognition lingered, a subtle hum of calculation and respect. Elias realized the duel had not just tested him, it had tested assumptions, rewritten expectations, and begun a shift in power dynamics that no one could ignore. The storm above raged on, but within the arena, a new current of understanding had taken hold. Humans were no longer just underdogs. They were unpredictable, adaptive, and capable of extraordinary feats when pushed to the edge. Elias walked forward, every step echoing on the jagged crystal floor, feeling the resonance of his victory, and understanding that the implications of what had transpired would unfold for years to come. The aftermath of the duel rippled far beyond the arena. Cadets returned to their quarters, replaying the encounter in their minds, analyzing every movement, every instinctive counter, every exploit of momentum that Elias had executed. Discussions erupted in training halls, in simulators, and across the comm networks of the academy. Some cadets were inspired, eager to test their own limits, while others were intimidated, questioning whether their understanding of human capability had been fatally limited until now. In the observation decks, Nyx sat quietly, claws resting lightly against the crystalline barrier, her neural spikes pulsing in measured rhythms as she reviewed her own performance. She had faced countless opponents, each one a challenge, each encounter reinforcing her perception of supremacy, yet this human had rewritten that perception in a mere 3 minutes. She understood instinctively that humans were not merely fragile prey, they were variables, unpredictable, capable of rapid adaptation that even the most precise combat training could not account for. Talric moved among the cadets, his stern expression softened by a rare hint of pride. The human you witnessed today, he said, voice carrying across the simulation halls, did not rely solely on strength, agility, or prior training. He relied on something deeper, something intrinsic. Adaptation under extreme conditions. Reflexive intelligence. That is a force no simulation, no artificial construct, no creature, no matter how lethal, can fully anticipate. Murmurs of astonishment spread through the room. Cadet scribbled notes, recording observations, replaying simulations to understand how instinct could surpass centuries of learned perfection. Meanwhile, Elias was escorted to the Central Command Chamber, where Clyra and other senior overseers awaited. Their multiple eyes regarded him with a mixture of curiosity, scrutiny, and respect. "You have changed the equation," Clyra said, clicks and pulses forming a tone of measured approval. "The Jacquerie have long dismissed humans as inferior. Your performance today challenges that assumption. Data from this encounter will be archived and disseminated. Your reflexive adaptability is a phenomenon we must study, and, potentially, integrate into broader strategic protocols." Elias nodded, exhaustion heavy in his limbs but clarity sharp in his mind. He understood the implications. This victory was not merely personal, it was tactical, philosophical, and historical. The galaxy's perception of humans, their fragility, their supposed predictability, was now under scrutiny. A single human had demonstrated resilience and instinctive mastery that could rewrite the assumptions of interspecies strategy. The Jacquerie commanders began consulting with Nyx and other warriors, their neural spikes flickering in rapid communication. Strategies, previously unchallenged for centuries, were being reconsidered. If humans could adapt so rapidly under lethal conditions, then every prior assessment of their limitations was suspect. Nyx's acknowledgement lingered in the air, her observations forming a subtle undercurrent of respect that would influence Jacquerie training, combat preparation, and diplomatic interactions in the cycles to come. Elias was escorted to a private training chamber for recovery and evaluation, yet his mind was already racing. The encounter had revealed potential he had not consciously known he possessed. Reflexive adaptation, instinctive intelligence under life-threatening stress, the exploitation of momentum and pattern, these were tools now unlocked. He flexed his hands, feeling the tension in his muscles, replaying the timing of every strike, every counter, every microsecond in which survival became mastery. Across the academy, instructors began altering their training protocols. Cadets were introduced to drills that emphasized unpredictability, reflexive decision-making, and instinctive adaptation rather than rote memorization. The victory had sparked a paradigm shift. Humans could not only survive lethal environments but could also dominate, given the right pressure and the activation of latent potential. Every simulation, every duel, every exercise would now be informed by what Elias had demonstrated. Nyx, still recovering, observed from a distance as cadets practiced new drills inspired by Elias' techniques. The Predator's neural spikes pulsed rhythmically, a subtle reflection of calculation and respect. Her evaluation of humans had shifted fundamentally. What had once been a species considered fragile was now recognized as dangerous, unpredictable, and capable of exceeding expectations in ways Jacquerie doctrine had never accounted for. Talric approached Elias once more, standing beside him in the quiet chamber. "You've done more than survive," he said, voice low, filled with weight and reverence. "You've set a new standard. Every opponent you face from now on, every cadet who trains in these halls, will know the lesson you've taught: never underestimate a human. Never assume fragility. Never ignore instinct." Elias nodded, the magnitude of the moment sinking in. This was not just a victory, it was a redefinition of human potential, one that would echo across Krythos V and beyond. Elias closed his eyes briefly, letting the adrenaline ebb, letting the reality settle in. Humans were no longer merely prey, learners, or fragile underdogs. They were forces of instinct, of adaptability, of unexpected mastery. And in the quiet aftermath, as the storm outside raged and the academy recalibrated its understanding, Elias felt the truth of it: 1 human, 3 minutes, a single predator defeated, and the galaxy had been forced to recognize the power that lay hidden in the species it had long underestimated. The storm had finally begun to abate, and Krythos V's jagged horizon glimmered under the soft, fractured light of dissipating lightning. Within the arena, the remnants of the duel lay scattered, jagged crystal spires chipped and shattered, scorched impressions in the floor where claws had met rock, and the faint metallic echo of a predator subdued. Elias stood in the center, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with fatigue and exhilaration. Around him, cadets moved with a mixture of awe and disbelief, whispers still rippling through the stands as they absorbed what had transpired. Nyx approached him slowly, each movement controlled, yet devoid of aggression. Her neural spikes pulsed in a steady rhythm, a reflection of calculation, respect, and acceptance. She studied him carefully, head tilting as she assessed the human who had bested her. Elias met her gaze, unflinching, understanding that in this moment, there was recognition, silent but absolute. A predator acknowledging a force it had never fully anticipated, a species acknowledging the unpredictable resilience of another. Talric stepped forward beside him, voice quiet but resonant across the arena. "Cadet Vorn, you have done more than survive," he said. "You've proven that instinct, adaptability, and human resilience are forces to be reckoned with. What you've shown today will not be forgotten, it will shape the future of this academy, of Krythos V, and of how humans are perceived across the galaxy." Elias nodded, still catching his breath, absorbing the gravity of his actions. This was not simply victory, it was precedent, a shift in perception that would ripple far beyond these walls. The cadets began to gather around, some hesitant, some eager, but all with eyes wide and expressions filled with a mix of reverence and excitement. They approached Elias cautiously, seeking guidance, understanding, and a measure of the human's newfound status. "Cadet Vorn," one said, voice trembling slightly, how did you survive her strikes? How did you anticipate what no one else could?" Elias looked at them, exhaustion mingling with a clarity born of instinct and experience. "I didn't anticipate," he said slowly, "I reacted. I adapted. I trusted what my body could do when everything else was against me. That's all humans have always had, resilience, instinct, the ability to change under pressure. And sometimes, that's enough to survive, and to win." Nyx stepped closer, her claws retracted but her presence imposing. Her voice came as a series of clicks and pulses, harsh yet precise. Elias listened carefully, deciphering the meaning not just in sound but in intent. She was acknowledging the lesson he had taught, the anomaly he represented. A single human had demonstrated that instinct and resilience could overcome millennia of lethal perfection. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of respect and mutual understanding. Across the arena, Clyra and the senior overseers recorded every detail, their multiple eyes reflecting lightning flashes and jagged crystals. Data would be archived, simulations recalibrated, and strategies revised. The implications were immense. Humans had proven themselves not just survivable but formidable, capable of reshaping expectations in ways no one had considered. What had been dismissed as fragility was now recognized as unpredictable potential. The cadets began testing their own abilities again, inspired and challenged by Elias' performance. Movements once considered impossible were now approached with curiosity and determination. Training protocols were rewritten on the spot, instructors demonstrated new techniques emphasizing adaptation, instinctive response, and unpredictability. Elias watched quietly, realizing that his actions had done more than save himself, they had ignited a revolution in thought, perception, and practice. Nyx moved to the perimeter, observing the interactions between cadets, instructors, and Elias. Her neural spikes pulsed with controlled rhythm, her eyes reflecting a deep calculation. Though defeated, she remained composed, a predator adjusting its understanding. Elias sensed the subtle shift, the Jacquerie would no longer underestimate humans. A precedent had been set, and it would influence combat, diplomacy, and interspecies perception for cycles to come. Talric placed a hand on Elias' shoulder, voice soft but steady. "You've shown them what humans are capable of. Remember this, Cadet, the galaxy will test you again. Every adversary, every challenge, will be different, but your ability to adapt, to trust your instincts, to survive against impossible odds, that is your strength. Never forget it. Elias nodded, the words resonating deep within him. He had learned the truth not just in theory but in the crucible of combat. The storm finally broke, rain beginning to wash over the jagged arena, sparkling against broken crystal and the jagged floor where history had been made. Elias looked out over the horizon, chest still heaving, muscles sore but mind sharp. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. 1 cadet, 3 minutes, a predator subdued, and an entire species recognized as unpredictable, resilient, and dangerous in ways they had never anticipated. Nyx inclined her head one final time, the gesture of acknowledgement resonating in the silence of the arena. Elias returned the nod, a quiet understanding passing between human and predator. The cadets dispersed, inspired and forever changed, instructors recalibrated, and the observers recorded every detail. The duel had ended, but its legacy was just beginning. Elias stood alone for a moment, feeling the aftermath settle around him. He had survived the impossible, bested a predator, and revealed the hidden strength of his species. The storm washed over him, rain mingling with sweat and exhaustion, and he understood the truth. Humans were unpredictable, resilient, and capable of achieving the impossible when pushed to the edge. And in that understanding, Elias smiled faintly, knowing that his actions had changed the course of history.